Sit back, it's time to get groovy. Question, do you remember that movie?
Welcome back to Remember That Movie. I am the third Alejandro Rosa on IMDb.
And I'm Steve Johnston, and I am not on IMDb.
Welcome to our podcast. If you're new here we look at the films of the past with the eyes of today. And in this particular episode, we are going to the year 2000, the millennium. And we are going to visit a film called Wonder Boys. Before we get started, I have to ask, so this is my pick for this episode. This was my movie that I chose. Steve, I have no idea. Do you have any history with this film? Did you know of its existence? Had you watched it before? Please share with me and the audience.
I have to go with option A. I was not aware of this movie's existence prior to you mentioning it last episode.
At all?
Nope. Did not ring any bells. And then having found it and watched it, I can safely say that, nope, I did not know of this at all.
By the end of the episode, he will find out, folks, that that's pretty accurate with everyone else.
Oh, no. Oh.
Before we get started, I need to take that VHS, turn it around, and read what's written in the back. An unfinished novel, a stolen car, a murdered pet, and a failing marriage are just a few of the crises piling up like a logjam in this often hilarious story of bright promise gone awry. During a single hectic weekend, college professor Grady Tripp, Michael Douglas, scrambles to gather together a life that has suddenly reeled out of control. Along for the ride are his gifted, troubled student, Tobey Maguire, his eccentric editor, Robert Downey Jr., the merry chancellor of his university, Frances McDormand, who is pregnant with his child, and his sultry student boarder, Katie Holmes. Directed by Curtis Hanson, this darkly comedic odyssey of self-discovery was hailed by one critic as, quote, one of the best movies of the year. Wonder Boys is based on Michael Chabon's 1995 novel, his second novel. He is a Pulitzer, Nebula, and Hugo Award winner. That's pretty fancy in writing circles.
Very.
This film is directed by Curtis Hanson. Have you ever heard of Curtis Hanson?
The name rang a bell, but I could not place where I knew it from.
He is an Oscar, Emmy, and Golden Globe nominee, best known for the 1997 film L.A. Confidential.
Ah, there you go.
He actually won the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay for that film. But he did not write this film. This film is written by Steve Kloves. He is best known for writing and directing the fabulous Baker Boys, which is a big deal film that maybe at some point we'll actually cover. He's also, strangely enough, famous for adapting a certain wizard movie series.
Really?
All but one of the Harry Potters are actually adapted by Steve Kloves.
Oh, very good.
Had no idea.
No.
Curtis Hanson not only brought over his cinematographer from L.A. Confidential, he even brought his editor from L.A. Confidential. Now,
Nice.
Please keep in mind, L.A. Confidential was nominated for many, many awards. We have Dante Spinotti. What is it about Italian cinematographers? Why is it that they're all Italian? Please leave a note in the comments, because I don't know. Dante Spinotti is a 2-time Academy Award nominee. He won a BAFTA for Last of the Mohicans.
Oh, very good.
Dede Allen, 3-time Academy Award nominee, and a BAFTA winner for 1975's Dog Day Afternoon.
Oh, wow. It's been a while.
This is an interesting film. It is a small film.
I'm glad that you said that, because that was one of the main thoughts that I had, that this was a small film, but with the caliber of the actors involved, I felt bad saying it.
You're absolutely right. It's such a small film that Paramount Pictures, who was the main person behind this, had very little interest in doing this kind of quirky, little weird comedy. Do you know who convinced them? Michael Douglas. Michael Douglas is the lead in this film. He is huge in the year 2000. And you have to pay a lot to get Michael Douglas to be in your film. But Michael Douglas liked this script so much that he actually decreased his fee to be in this movie. Wait, we can get Michael Douglas at a discount? Now we're interested. Tell us more. I actually love him in this film. He gained 25 pounds to be in this film. He just ate pizza, subs, and drank a lot of beer. Which sounds like a terrible thing. In addition to Michael Douglas, we have a great cast of actors, including, but not limited to, Robert Downey Jr. Now, Robert Downey Jr. came up a couple of episodes ago when we did Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, to the point that my wife made fun of me because I have refused to do animated films back to back. But she said, oh, but you'll do a Robert Downey Jr. film almost back to back? I would like to point out and give credit to my wife. It was my wife who brought up Wonder Boys, a film I had completely forgotten about.
Okay.
So she was the impetus for getting us here today. Robert Downey Jr., if you recall from our Kiss Kiss Bang Bang episode, please go back there and listen to that. We'll wait. He was actually on probation when he filmed this back in 1999. So what happened? Well, there were concerns. They wanted him for the part. The director wanted him for the part, but he was a risk.
Was he still having insurance problems at this point?
He was having insurance problems. He was having legal problems. He was having substance use problems. So what did he do? He flew to Pittsburgh and had dinner with the director and essentially convinced him that he was dedicated to this film and that he was not going to be an issue. According to everything that I read, for the 4.5 filming months of this, he was perfectly fine. He then went back to LA, violated his probation, and was incarcerated shortly thereafter. But he's not the only Academy Award-winning actor we have in this crew. Frances freaking McDormand is in this. When this movie comes out, Steve, in the year 2000, she has another movie come out, which is like the very beginning of this podcast. It is a little film called Almost Famous, where she is nominated for an Oscar. She has about 8 different Oscar nominations. She has won 3 Oscars for performing, 2 Oscars for producing, and may have been, if I'm not mistaken, one of the first people to win both lead actor and producer in a film. We have Katie Holmes. Katie Holmes, who is in the middle of Dawson's Creek, where she has become very, very famous. Did you know she was one of the first big-time actors who got cast in a show because of a taped audition? Katie Holmes sent in a tape that her mother was reading the lines off camera. This is very common practice for everyone for the last 1,000 years, but when she did this show, it was kind of a new thing. So she's a couple of years into Dawson's Creek. It's a huge hit for those of you who are too young to remember. She starts doing films. She gets this role.
Nice.
And then we have a young man by the name of Tobey Maguire.
Very young Tobey Maguire.
He had already completed The Ice Storm, fantastic film. He had already completed Pleasantville, another fantastic film. And he had already done The Cider House Rules with Michael Caine. And he was 2 years before hitting Spider-Man land. We also have a returning actor to the podcast, Mr. Rip Torn.
Yes.
Who has such a small part in this movie that he's barely mentioned at all. And my favorite actually 2 favorites.
Kelly Bishop,
who is in there for 5 seconds, playing Tobey Maguire's grandmother, even though my wife pointed out she's like 56, which is actually only 2 years older than Douglas, who's 54 in this film. The other actress that I have to point out, Jane Addams, who plays Ula, a character that has stuck with me all of these years.
There's one other person.
I did forget one more he's written down, and that is the janitor.
Yes.
I actually wrote down in my notes as I was watching it, holy crap, that's Alan Tudyk. This is a great cast of actors, and they do a phenomenal job. In fact, one of the things that I walked away from was, oh my God, that's right. Michael Douglas is great.
He is.
He's great. And he's great in this.
Before we go too much further, what was your experience with this movie prior to this recent watching? Because I had no experience with it, but you didn't tell me why you picked it.
I feel like this is one of those movies that I ended up watching on DVD when it came out, a couple of years after it came out, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched it, I think, a couple of times, and then it went into the back of the file cabinet of movies that I watched and enjoyed, but didn't quite actually remember. Again, it was my wife who brought it up. And she was like, no, remember, it had Michael Douglas, and it was this and that. And I was like, I have a vague recollection of this. I remember liking it at the time.
Okay.
I did enjoy it. I know I enjoyed it. And in fact, as I watched it, this was definitely one of those films that I started remembering it as I watched it, and also remembering how much I loved it, even though I had clearly forgotten about 70% of the plot. It was interesting to me, Steve. This takes place at a college during a weekend, like it says. There's a, English department, literature festival, etc.
Word fest.
Word fest. Why is it that we make films about doctors and lawyers and English department majors? We never do a film about, the guy who's majoring in economics, the person who's studying accounting. We just don't make films about them in college. Think about it.
I am now.
Which, by the way, I went to college twice. The first time not successfully. But I went to college twice, and let me tell you something. I never thought, oh, that English department, I should write a movie about them.
Happening place.
I asked my wife about this film because clearly I watched it at a different time than she did. She did not watch it right away. She watched it a few years after it came out, and she said she thought she was maybe a sophomore or junior in college, which, in retrospect, is the perfect time to watch this film because it applies so much to your life, right? You're learning about professors and students, that dynamic, and she said she loved it. She loved it very much. And I have to say, one of the things that I learned about this film doing the research is that it takes place in Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
Not only does it take place in Pittsburgh, Steve, they actually did go and film it there.
Yes.
There was something when I was watching this film and I was talking to her afterwards, and I said, it feels so real. The houses feel real, the sets, right? The places feel very real. And then I learned that they did film in the Pittsburgh area. They went to Carnegie Mellon. They went to a couple of other places there. And I was like, oh, wow, yes, because, little known fact, I actually went to college outside of Pittsburgh. And so I'm familiar with kind of that general area. And I loved it. I loved that feel. It had a real genuineness to it. Tell me about your viewing experience.
I very much enjoyed this film. As you say, the characters are wonderful. The acting is great. I had forgotten how much I like Michael Douglas as an actor, because I don't think I've seen him in anything recently. Not that he hasn't done anything, I haven't seen him recently. So his voice is fantastic. I couldn't help but be reminded of The Big Lebowski. Not in terms of anything that goes on, but just in terms of the overall setup, because we have an eclectic collection of characters who find themselves dealing with some very unusual situations that lead to some marvelously hilarious results. And it was just an excellent ride. And one of the things I particularly enjoyed was this is going to sound a little weird, but the pacing. The pacing was fantastic. It never felt slow. There were obviously times that things were more involved, more action was occurring, and then sometimes that kind of eased off the gas a little bit, but it never drug. It was always moving at a good clip, taking us to the next bizarre occurrence. So I very much liked it.
It's the story of this college professor who wrote this one really great book that people are talking about. I think it's 7 years later, and he's been struggling to write a follow-up book. It's going to be a weird segue. The writer who wrote Eat, Pray, Love got a massive boost in her life, right, with this book that turned into a movie with Julia Roberts, etc. She has an entire TED Talk on writing the second book, because what the heck do you do when your book is so big? Then they expect you to write again, but it's no longer, are you going to write a second book? It's, are you going to write a second book that's as good as the first book? Because now the pressure is on. So I found it really fascinating from that end. He is struggling. He's been writing the second book. We learned that he's written over 2,000 pages because he can't stop writing it.
2,611 pages.
And we have this event that happens that leads to Robert Downey Jr.'s character, who is his editor, who did really well thanks to his first book, but now is also struggling because he doesn't have a hit and he needs a hit. So he shows up like, where's the second book? Give me it. I need a win. And in the process, we meet the students, right? We have Tobey Maguire's character, who is pretty eccentric.
Yeah. Reserved and brooding, dark.
And then we have Katie Holmes, who is not only Michael Douglas's student, but she's also a boarder at his house. And she's also very interested in him as a human, has a potential lover.
I am very pleased that he does not reciprocate that.
And I think that's honestly one of the jewels of the film, is that we have the beautiful, fantastic, very intelligent, let me point that out, because even though they listed her as like a sultry whatever, she's also one of his best students. And one of the people who will eventually give him the critique that he needs about his second book, which is fascinating to me, because the entire film, she's clearly doing some advances towards him. He is not reciprocating. And eventually it is she who looks at him and goes, dude, what happened with this book? Because she tries to read all 2,000 pages. And then she's like, you know what you taught us? You didn't do that in your book.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant twist to the story. And then we have Frances McDormand, the chancellor, whose husband is the head of the English department, which means he is Michael Douglas's boss.
Yes.
You know, to a certain extent. And we, of course, have learned that they have been in a relationship together. They have been having an affair. And she is now pregnant with his child. I also like, Steve, that this film takes place in one weekend. Isn't there something really cool about a movie that takes place in a matter of days and that you cover so much material just in a matter of days?
There was only one downside to the film. It's a plot point that is key to everything. Without this occurring, the movie doesn't happen. But at the same time, it was funny, but I didn't like it. Because they shoot the dog.
Yes.
They shoot the old dog. They shoot the old blind dog.
The night that Wordfest begins is such an important part of this plot. We have a big party at the Chancellor's house. We invite great, writers and things like that. Everyone is there. And in the process of all of this, we learn that Poe the dog hates Professor Grady. Even though he's half blind, he can still smell him. And he hates his guts. And we have a moment where the dog attacks Professor Grady. Because I think this is important, Steve. The dog doesn't just growl at him. The dog bites him.
Oh, yeah.
It starts biting him. And out of nowhere, James comes out and shoots the dog with a tiny pistol that he happens to keep in his pocket. And the dog dies.
Yes.
So now we have a corpse. But it's the corpse of a dog.
Yes.
And it's like, you just killed the head of the English department / the chancellor's dog. So what do? They shove it in a car and drive away, because that's what you need to do, Steve. One of my favorite lines is actually here, because James is like, oh my God, like, this is going to be terrible for me. He goes, no. You didn't shoot I shot the dog, says Professor Grady.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, what? You didn't shoot the dog? He goes, no, I shot the dog. It's okay. I have tenure.
Yes, that's right.
The death of Poe is a necessary vehicle for the plot. Just like the introduction of the character who is called Vernon, even though that's not his name.
It's not his name.
Is a hysterical thing that I didn't quite understand, Steve, until the very end. At some point, they are in a bar and they're about to leave. Professor Grady has this classic car, and this man jumps out and says, "That's my car." And they have this whole thing, and at some point, he jumps up and dents the hood with his bottom.
Yeah. Yes.
Only later do we find that somebody owed Michael Douglas money, and they gave him this car, which was apparently stolen from Vernon, whose name is not Vernon.
Right.
And I think here's where this is based on a book. Because only in a book could you have this much plot just shoved in there in the most intricate, delightful way. What did you like about, other than you clearly didn't like Poe dying, but what did you like about the viewing?
You hit upon kind of the key thing that I really liked, and that is the vast array of interwoven plots that show up here and there at the beginning, then lay dormant for most of the film, and then come back and actually play a semi-major role. Like the bit about the car, because we assume that this Vernon character, he's just drunk. He's drunk and he's got the wrong car, and then no, that's actually his car that was stolen. And I love the fact that he is just so friendly with everyone after he gets his car back. It's like, oh yeah, you're the guy who stole my car for a couple of days, but yeah, I'll give you a ride back to town.
And his partner, who is a waitress at the beginning of the film, named Ula. By the way, I will tell you this, and this goes to the actress named Jane Addams. Now, I know Jane Addams from one role, and it's not this one. Frasier, later seasons, Niles Crane falls in love with a plastic surgeon who he eventually is about to marry or has married, and then dumps her for Daphne. That is actually played by Jane Addams.
Oh, okay.
And she is not a pleasant character in that one. But when I watch this, and I remembered them introducing Ula, I kind of did the same thing that Michael Douglas's character did. I went, Ula. And I was like, that's right. I loved Ula. She was so charming and so sweet and so lovely. And she's super pregnant. Oh, yeah. The character is. During this film, Michael Douglas's character, Professor Grady, has spells where he kind of loses consciousness. And there is this great moment where he loses consciousness inside Vernon's car when he's trying to get stuff back. And he wakes up to Ula looking at him going, I know you. I never forget a drink. And he says, I never forget an Ula.
I never forget an Ula.
One of my favorite lines. There is a coat that belongs to Marilyn Monroe that is in this film. It doesn't matter. At the end of it, Ula is wearing the coat. And the most touching moment is they're supposed to get the coat back to give it back to the Chancellor's husband, which was stolen by James. And Michael Douglas looks at Ula, who is, again, just unbelievably charming. And he looks at her and he goes, that's Marilyn Monroe's coat, which she's wearing. And he says, she had really small shoulders. And not a lot of people know that. She has small shoulders, just like you. And then he doesn't ask for the coat back. And Vernon, whose name is not Vernon, and Ula drive away. And it is the sweetest, cutest thing in the world. And I was utterly charmed by it. But I think that is kind of like my conclusion on this film. I was just utterly charmed by it. What about you, Steve? What is your conclusion on this film? Did you find it charming?
Very enjoyable. Charming is a good word for it. I had a couple minor, complaints is too strong of a word, but there were a couple things that I just didn't quite understand. Because there are a lot of events that occur because characters make some interesting choices. Ula keeping the coat, for example, was one that I just didn't quite wrap my brain around. Because I was convinced that, no, we need to get the coat back to the Chancellor in order to smooth everything out. I was also not particularly happy with how quickly we glossed over the ending with regards to James Lear, Tobey Maguire's character, because we see him put in the back of a police car, We know that he met with the Chancellor at some point, and then he's being honored at the Wordfest closing ceremony. And I was just curious as to, okay, what happened behind closed doors? What conversation occurred that could have smoothed everything out to the point that he is still a student at the university and the Chancellor is actually congratulating him because he's having his own book published?
Well, it's not the Chancellor. It's the head of the English department, the Chancellor's husband. Because what has happened at the end of the film is that we realize James has actually written a very good book. Professor Grady looks at his agent and goes, he's your problem now. You need to fix this. You need to improvise. So what does the agent do? He goes and meets with the head of the English department and goes, yeah, so I'm going to publish James's novel, which is a big deal for the college. But also, do you have a thing about Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe? Do you want to write a book about it? Oh, have you written a book? I'll publish that too. That's what he did. He greased the wheels.
Okay. I missed that then.
And it's why when he announces that, Robert Downey Jr.'s character looks over at Professor Grady and just rolls his eyes.
I missed the eye roll, so I did not pick up on that.
What do you think was the reception for this film?
I am basing my guess purely on something you said at the start of the episode, which may or may not have made it into the edit. I said that I had never heard of it, and you kind of leaned forward and said, yeah, no one else did either. So I am assuming the reception was not great. I am going to say, though, that those who did see it really liked it, found it as charming as we did, probably got some good critical reception, but overall, not a success from a financial standpoint.
Well, folks, let's see if he's right. So, the budget for this film was $55 million.
Ooh.
The box office for this film was $33.4 million. But, to their credit, there may have been multiple reasons for this.
Okay.
Number one, this film was released in 2000, February of 2000, a week after the Academy Award nominees were released. Now, some people might be like, what does that have to do with anything? Very simple. The companies whose movies they are nominated for will then spend a ton of money to advertise those films in hopes of getting awards.
Yep.
Which means that whatever Wonder Boys was doing was going to be overshadowed, even by Paramount, who was probably busy trying to push their other movies, the ones that got nominated for things.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was one. Two, and this is kind of in a retrospective way, looking back, they criticized the marketing for this film. They didn't know how to market it. This happens with some films. They don't know what hole to put it in, and so they said the marketing was terrible for this film. Okay. Even the poster was terrible for this film. So, yeah, it did not have a good marketing campaign. The timing of it was pretty terrible. You don't push a movie out right as the nominees are going out. That's not a good time to put this movie in. However, Steve is right again. The critics liked this movie.
Excellent.
Overall.
Oh, yes.
It wasn't everybody. I'll give you an example. Entertainment Weekly gave it a C+.
Ooh.
Yeah. More of a pass-fail than anything else. Here's a fun quote for you. The problem is that everyone involved seems to have agreed it was a great idea for a movie, and they pretty much just left it at that. That was said by A.O. Scott at the New York Times.
Oh.
But I will tell you that if you look up the reviews for this movie, what you will find is a bunch of critics who are like, this is great. And here is my favorite positive review. The most accurate movie about campus life I can remember. It's accurate, not because it captures intellectual debates or campus politics, but because it knows two things. One, students come and go, but faculty actually live there. Two, many faculty members stay stuck in the graduate student mode for decades. 4 stars by Mr. Roger Ebert.
I was hoping it would be him.
Of course it was him.
Nice.
Now, even though this movie was released right as the Oscar nominations for 1999 were released, it still got nominations a year later, and that's a big deal.
Wow.
Because if you know anything about the Oscars and award season, companies who want to promote their nominees tend to push their releases towards the end of the year so that they're fresh in people's minds for the Oscar nominations. This movie actually got 3 Oscar nominations.
Ooh, okay.
It got an Oscar nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay,
All right.
Best Editing, and Best Original Song.
The soundtrack is excellent on this movie.
The soundtrack is excellent. It was very well thought out.
Oh, yeah.
You have Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen, a bunch of other ones, and the Oscar went to Bob Dylan, who wrote an original song for this film.
Nice.
They actually showed him a 90-minute rough cut of the film to try to get him into it. It actually got 4 Golden Globe nominations, one of which was Best Picture.
Wow.
Best Adapted Screenplay, again.
Okay.
Best Original Song, which it won, so it won a Golden Globe and an Oscar for the best song, Bob Dylan.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
also Best Actor for Michael Douglas, which I think is highly deserved.
Well deserved, yes.
Well deserved. It got 2 BAFTA nominations, one for Best Adapted Screenplay, once again, and one for Best Actor, once again. One of the things I absolutely loved about this film was the moment when Michael Douglas calls the Chancellor's husband sitting on his porch.
Yes.
And he said, "Do you know what time it is?" And he goes, "I don't know. I think it's like 8."
According to my watch, it's 8:30, but that's probably not right, or something like that.
He's like, "It's like 3 in the morning." And he goes, "Yeah, I'm in love with your wife." It's such a great moment for the character, for the film, for the plot, for everything. And I don't know, it's kind of encompasses what I feel about this movie. This is a good movie. This is a good film. You have great performances by multiple actors. You have a great plot. Clearly, the source material was fantastic.
Yes.
They did allow some changes, though. Michael Chabon let the screenwriter make changes. He said, no, make it your own.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was very supportive of, like, you need to turn this into your thing. Again, I think that we don't always watch the best films on this podcast. It might be one of our criticisms. Actually, I know it is, because one of our viewers has said so to me. Why don't you guys ever watch good movies? But I will say that this time, we really did. We did. We watched a really good film. And so my personal opinion, and Steve, I would like you to weigh in. Here's my personal opinion to listeners and viewers. Watch it. If you haven't, you're missing out on multiple great performances. Michael Douglas, Robert Downey Jr., charming and hilarious as can be. Tobey Maguire, Katie Holmes, Frances McDormand, doing what she does best, which is give incredible performances in everything that she does. I think it's great. I think it's wonderful. Steve, what is your final thoughts on this film?
With apologies to a certain viewer who thinks that we should disagree more, I'm afraid I agree with you 100%. This is a marvelous little gem. I'm glad that you picked it. I'm glad that I got to see it. And I would encourage anyone who wants to go out and watch it. Great performances, great story, and just very well done all around.
Folks, you can catch this on any streaming service. You can pay less than $5 to experience this film, and I highly recommend that you do. I don't always say that about our films, but I will say that about this one. Steve, I have pontificated long enough.
All right.
It is time for me to put my baton down, slide it across the table, and hand it to you, sir. Where shall we go next?
Well, next we are going to go back a couple of years to 1998 to a movie that I was interested in seeing when it came out, saw when it came out, and don't remember much about it after that. So, kind of like this one, I've forgotten most of it. We're going to go back and see if I remember anything. We are going to go and watch 1998's Bulworth.
Thank you so much, folks. Please know that we love your comments. We read them. We like them. Sometimes we even comment back. Thank you so much for listening or watching. Thank you for being a part of this random experience. And please come back when we go back to Bulworth.
Sit back, it's time to get groovy. Question, do you remember that movie?